Thank you to Mr. Allen, Daisuke, the Ang's Human 5512, and Riley, call me Riley, for subscribing to the channel. Jimmy is the main protagonist of Mouthwashing. When the ship crashes, he steps up and takes over as the captain, when the previous captain, Curly, is severely injured and on the verge of death. However, while he's in charge, things somehow go downhill even further when the other crewmates start working against him and talking behind his back. I wonder why they treat him this way. Let's get into the analysis. 7 days before the crash. We start with Anya giving Curly the routine psych evaluation. Even though Jimmy isn't in this scene, it's important as Anya shows reluctance to do his evaluation, mentioning a past comment Jimmy made about being sexually attracted to cartoon horses. We don't know much about the characters at this point, but we know that is completely inappropriate and would be considered sexual harassment in the workplace. Curly agrees to take it off of Anya's hand, giving her a sigh of relief. Curly goes with Jimmy to the cockpit to do Jimmy's evaluation. Before they go, Curly makes a joke about Jimmy's comment towards Anya, who brushes it off as they go to the cockpit. So despite Anya's verbal display of discomfort, instead of telling Jimmy off, Curly laughs about it, which is the equivalent of brushing it under the rug. In the cockpit, Jimmy wants Curly to make something up, but Curly insists that they do it properly. We don't actually see the full analysis, we only see the end where Curly says he'll just put good for a question we don't hear. This wording gives the impression that Curly still kind of half-heartedly did the evaluation, because he thinks he knows his friend well enough, and especially considering the later events in the game, but this can only be speculated as we don't see the full evaluation. Once they've finished, Curly asks off-record how Jimmy's really doing. He mentions that he likes the role as it gives him the feeling of control, not concerning at all, and Curly's glad as Jimmy was struggling back on Earth. Jimmy asks why Curly feels that he's on edge all the time. Curly reflects on his career, wondering if he's on the right career path, or if he should abandon it all and start something new. Jimmy seems to understand, saying that Curly must feel like he's on the wrong ladder altogether. As a message comes through, Jimmy has to leave. A point to note is that the game is extremely vague on Jimmy's past. At this point in the story, it makes sense as it would spoil the plot twist, but it does raise some questions as to why. If we follow the events of the game, perhaps Jimmy struggled to find a job because he got himself into hot water, perhaps through harassment of female colleagues, such as maybe inappropriate comments or even touching them inappropriately, or worst case scenario, potentially assaulting someone. 6 days before the crash. Curly walks into the main room and sees that the crew have thrown him a surprise birthday party. You're only allowed one communal party a year, so they choose Curly's birthday, but he's the only one with authority to make the cake. Once he's made the cake, Curly reveals that after this job, everyone will be laid off by the company. He was supposed to tell them closer to the end of the trip, but decided they should know sooner. Everyone reacts in their own way, but Jimmy's is the most explosive. He starts yelling at Curly, saying that he must feel better now that he can leave his position without feeling guilty for abandoning the crew. He mentions the way Curly spoke about his struggle of a life, then takes a dig at each member of the crew before turning back to Curly. He says that Curly can look for something bigger and better. Curly tries to defend himself, saying that he doesn't want to feel like his life is something he has to escape from, but Jimmy cuts him off, saying that the only thing he's trying to escape from is the crew, how they're dirt beneath his shoes, and now that he can clean them off and move forward. Curly tries to explain himself, but Jimmy doubles down, saying that he's only trying to frame it in a way that doesn't make him look like a bad guy. Abandon the crew, but remain the model captain. With the mood at an all-time low, Curly cuts the cake. 0 days before the crash. Curly goes to talk to Jimmy about what Anya told him. Jimmy asks what will happen when they get back home. He says how he always heard how good of a leader Curly was, which he found annoying. But now, with what Jimmy did, who knows what will happen now. He says that everything that he and Curly worked towards won't matter. Curly tries to be hopeful, saying that they've been through difficult situations before, but Jimmy fires back that it was Curly's responsibility, as it happened under his watch, and that's all he'll be hearing for the rest of his life. He suggests turning this into a tragedy, where despite their best efforts, the Toll Park crew were never found. No one survives, and Curly goes down as the hero that tried to save the crew, meaning that his position won't be jeopardized. Jimmy puts his hand on Curly's arm and says he'll take care of it, and walks into the cockpit. Later on, with red warning lights flashing on the screen, Curly runs to the cockpit with Jimmy sitting outside the door with his head in his hands. Curly yells at him but gets no response. He runs into the cockpit and takes the full force of the crash. This scene confirms that Jimmy was the one who crashed the ship, meaning he tried to take out the crew because of the crime that he committed. When everyone comes out unscathed, except for Curly, who is immobilized and unable to talk, he proceeds to blame him instead of taking responsibility. Curly implies that he's helped Jimmy through his lowest points in life, despite the implications of what he could have done in the past. Yet Jimmy proceeds to blame him, putting it into his head that it was his fault and that his life will be ruined once they land, instead of admitting, acknowledging, or even apologizing for what he did. He feels no remorse or sympathy towards the affected parties. So when he says that he'll take care of it, he's acting like he's doing Curly a favour by being the one to crash the ship. In his delusional mind, he truly believes that he's done nothing wrong and his actions aren't his responsibility. 2 months after the crash, Jimmy decides to step up as the captain. He discusses with the surviving crew whether they should open the cargo hold to see if it will help them survive. They decide to open it, and Jimmy goes to find the code scanner. On his way, he passes Swansea, who's standing outside utility. Jimmy questions him, being told that Swansea isn't letting anyone in as it's all foamed up, and if anyone else chops at it too much, it could breach a hole in the ship. Jimmy reluctantly accepts this and goes to the cockpit. This is strange, as usually Jimmy is somebody that will do anything to get what he wants, but I guess against Swansea, picking a fight with him is a losing battle, and even Jimmy knows that. After he finds the code scanner, he heads to the medical room and finds Anya standing over Curly. Anya tells him that he's in a lot of pain and can't stand the noise. She asks Jimmy if he could give him his pills instead, but he berates her. He says that giving Curly his pills is her only job, and that people have to earn their titles. He finishes angrily, saying that he'll take care of it. Jimmy gives Curly his medicine, and Anya runs out of the room as she can't stand the noise. Everyone meets outside the cargo hold, and Jimmy uses the code scanner to unlock the door. Jimmy has been able to take full control of the crew and has achieved his dream of being captain without having to put any work or effort into his role. However, compared to Curly, Jimmy is a terrible captain. There's a reason why Curly had such a good reputation in the first place. Jimmy just likes to feel superior to the crew, especially Anya. When she struggles with the medication because of her pregnancy, which was Jimmy's fault, he talks down to her by taking digs into her medical skills and showing obvious frustration when giving Curly his meds. 2 months after the crash, the crew discover that they've been shipping mouthwash this entire time. Anya looks at the ingredients and says the sugar content offsets it as a disinfectant. Swansea looks and sees that it contains 14% ethanol, and he celebrates and immediately starts drinking. 3 months after the crash, Jimmy wakes up to go check on Curly, who he hears writhing in pain. He then goes to find Anya and sees her and Swansea at the end of the conversation in the cockpit. Jimmy asks why they're up so late and tells them to keep it together. In response to Anya, Jimmy goes back to Curly and rants to him about how everyone sees him now, implies that it slipped her mind. Jimmy says he'll do it. Anya tries to protest, but Jimmy cuts her off as being in charge. He complains about the responsibility and sarcastically thanks Curly for putting him in that situation. We can see how delusional Jimmy is when he's ranting to Curly. He thinks the crew genuinely see him as the captain, but aside from Daisuke, Swansea doesn't let him into utility, and Anya is only being nice to him out of fear of what he could do to her. He's also talking down to her again, almost annoyed that she's crying, whereas at this point in the game, she rightfully would have a lot to cry about. He proceeds to blame Curly for allegedly putting him in this situation, when 1. He crashed the ship to avoid responsibility, and 2. Proclaimed the rest of the crew, and 2. Proclaimed to the rest of the crew that he's in charge by telling them he's the captain now. Take Responsibility Part 1. We enter an out-of-reality scene where we see a disfigured Curly sitting in front of a birthday cake. He suggests having some, but Jimmy says that it's mediocre at best. Jimmy asks why even bother with the mediocre stuff. Curly replies that everyone tries to escape the bad, but it's rare to get out of. People wonder if the mediocre piece is all they're ever gonna get. He knows life isn't the best, but at least he could live a life that he's satisfied with. The best times could be getting a promotion, buying a house, falling in love, but most of the time, all you get is some mediocre cake with your friend. He asks Jimmy to grab a knife for the cake. Jimmy goes to the cockpit and grabs the axe lodged into the right hand seat with blood all over it. He takes it and goes back to Curly, who is now on the table, replacing the cake. We hold the axe, preparing to cut, and then the scene ends. This scene is all about the different. On the other hand, Curly understands how hard life is for the majority of people. Most people go through the mediocrity of life. They experience some good and some bad. But when they experience the good stuff, it makes it worth it because it feels so much better and you know that it was earned. When Jimmy grabs the axe from the cockpit, it's noted that it's in Curly's chair. This shows how he's completely screwed over Curly's life. In an attempt to avoid responsibility and get what he wants, Jimmy ends up destroying the one person he looked up to and was jealous of. He finally got the success that Curly had and is reveling in it, despite not earning it whatsoever. He finally got the success that Curly had and is reveling in it, despite not earning it whatsoever. 4 months after the crash, Jimmy goes to check on the crew. The first person he finds is a drunk Daisuke lying on the floor, who admits why he was on this internship in the first place and his fear of being a total screw up. When he goes to the lounge, he sees Anya sitting down and accidentally makes her jump while she's staring at Mouthwash, contemplating on whether to drink or not. She mentions the chance of there being more medicine in a cabinet that was all foamed up but potentially accessible. He grabs the axe from Swansea, who is drunkenly dancing in front of the sunset window screen. When Jimmy talks to him, Swansea reminds him that the axe was entrusted to him by Curly, clearly stating that the only person he considered the captain was Curly, calling it a big responsibility. Swansea ends up swinging the axe into the window screen and sits down. Jimmy uses the axe to get the extra medicine and isopropyl. Anya appears behind and praises him for getting it. She then sheepishly asks again if Jimmy could give Curly his meds. Jimmy blows up on her more than last time, saying that he's had to do everything around here, while listing off everything that was suggested to him by Anya, claiming it as his own. He says he'll take care of it and goes to give Curly his meds. Jimmy may think that he's taking responsibility, but he's only fulfilling his fantasies and playing captain to feed his own ego. He really hasn't done much on his own, and even so, everything that he has done was suggested to him by Anya. Yeah, he yells at her because she's unable to do something that makes her uncomfortable because of what he did to her. He's acting as if he's the only one trying to save everyone, but he's the one who put everyone in this situation in the first place. 5 months after the crash, Daisuke yells at Jimmy that Anya has gotten herself stuck in the medical room, but when they go and ask her, she admits that she's locked herself in on purpose, saying something cryptic about our worst moments not making us monsters, and that she'll take care of it, which reflects what Jimmy has been saying to her the entire time. Jimmy asks Daisuke if there's any other way into the medical room. Daisuke says a vent in utility, but Swansea has been guarding it the whole time. They go and ask him, and he still refuses. Worried about Curly, Jimmy comes up with a plan to knock Swansea out. They give him a cocktail and use the isopropyl from earlier to give it a kick. When Swansea drinks it, he's immediately knocked out, and Daisuke panics that he'll never wake up. Jimmy confidently claims that he'll be fine and won't remember anything when he wakes up. They go to utility and find that it's completely clear of foam, compared to how Swansea described it. Jimmy theorises that Swansea lied about the foam so that he could wait for everyone else to die and get into the last functioning cryopod himself. They see that the vent has sparks and exposed wires coming out of it. Jimmy says that Daisuke would be able to fit through, but Daisuke shows reluctance due to Swansea's warning. Jimmy persuades him, saying that Swansea would be proud of him and everyone's counting on him. Captain's orders. With that, Daisuke climbs into the vent and we immediately hear him howling in pain. He manages to open the medical room door, but is severely injured and heavily bleeding out. It's unfortunate that at such a vital time, Jimmy was the one in control. With Swansea absolutely wasted and Anya locked away, Daisuke had been left at the hands of Jimmy. Being naive, Daisuke puts his full trust into Jimmy, so he isn't aware of his toxic behaviour. This means Jimmy is able to take full advantage of him, which is the only reason Daisuke goes along with Jimmy's terrible plans. When they discover that Swansea lied, Jimmy thinks he's so smart by immediately assuming that Swansea would selfishly hide himself in the cryopod. Despite the fact that Swansea's behaviour has been anything but for survival, he's basically drinking himself to death to enjoy the last few moments he has left alive. The only reason he could say this is because this would be his plan if the situation got worse. He's projecting his selfishness onto Swansea because he doesn't want to admit that they're really his thoughts. 8 hours until judgment. Daisuke is heavily bleeding out. Swansea says to use the extra disinfectant, but Jimmy mumbles about the cocktail which Swansea wouldn't know about. Jimmy and Swansea go searching for something else to save Daisuke. When Jimmy enters the medical room, there's a strange effect around Curly's bed, where we are unable to see fates of Curly and Anya. Jimmy goes to the cargo hold and starts to enter a strange distortion. He first sees a tombstone with Daisuke's name on it, and when he uses the code scanner, it disappears. This is to symbolise that Daisuke's fate has unfortunately been sealed. He heads down the stairs and we hear a loud roar, with a message flashing up to keep quiet. In this sequence, the cargo hold turns into a maze, where using the code scanner, we see a giant horse on the ceiling trying to get us. The horse is blind, so it can only hear the player if we walk or run for too long. Once Jimmy gets to the end, he finds Polly holding the mouthwash and he's teleported back to reality with Daisuke in front of him. Jimmy uses the mouthwash on Daisuke, who immediately howls in pain as we hear it burn into his wounds. As Daisuke is bleeding out, we can see that Jimmy is panicking at what to do as he stupidly used the disinfectant for something dangerous and unnecessary. He can't fully admit to Swansea that he used the disinfectant on the cocktail, but not because he's ashamed, but because it would mean admitting the flaws in his plan to knock out Swansea. When Jimmy makes his way through the cargo hold and is being chased by the giant horse, it represents Jimmy's usual antics of avoiding responsibility. Horse represents his unborn baby, referring to the offhand comment about being attracted to cartoon horses. He's actively running away from responsibility. It wasn't the company laying off that put him in this situation. It was Jimmy assaulting Anya, as it was his choice, and crashing the ship in order to avoid responsibility. When Jimmy gets the mouthwash and pours it onto Daisuke, it's a nail in the coffin that shows his lack of respect for Anya on any level. She mentions earlier that the sugar content in the mouthwash offsets it as a disinfectant. Jimmy actively ignores her, as even thinking her wrong and incompetent, while being the real incompetent one, and still uses it on Daisuke that causes him more pain that he was already in before. 6 hours until judgment. Daisuke is still in pain as Jimmy mentions that the bleeding won't stop. Swansea is sitting over Daisuke holding the axe. He gives him a heartbreaking and wholesome final speech revealing how he felt about Daisuke. Jimmy is suspicious of what Swansea is going to do, but is just sitting there watching him. Swansea lifts the axe and swings it down onto Daisuke, putting an end to his misery. Jimmy is mortified about what Swansea has done and tries to call him out for lying about utility. Swansea laughs at Jimmy, saying that Anya was telling Swansea something, commenting that a captain should go down with his ship, telling Jimmy that he knows he would try to take the last cryopod for himself. Swansea says that Jimmy can get into the cryopod and tell whatever story he wants to when he's saved. He takes the axe and leaves. Jimmy goes to the medical room and we discover that Anya has taken her own life. We see the drawer open under the Curly's bed, and Jimmy manages to use the code to gain access to the gun. When he goes to open the door, Swansea charges at him with the axe. Despite all the awful things that have happened so far, the game treats Swansea killing Daisuke as a mercy kill, as he doesn't do it for himself. Despite Jimmy yelling at Swansea for what he did, he didn't try to stop him when he paused before swinging the axe down. He tried to use this as a gotcha moment when telling Swansea about the cryopod, but Swansea knows how selfish Jimmy is and knows that he would try to get into the pod himself if he had the chance. Jimmy is trying to make himself sound morally superior to Swansea, but he's having none of it and almost refuses to argue with Jimmy, as with Daisuke gone, Swansea had basically given up, until he charged at Jimmy with the axe. Take Responsibility Part 2. This sequence shows Jimmy walking through a vent in the ship from the medical room. As he goes through, he sees Daisuke looking at his shadow, then walking away. The lights change from white to red. As we walk on, we see a note stuck on the vent reading, "There's no turning back now." When we try to turn around, our vision becomes distorted, with what looks like Swansea's face appearing in front of us, and it resets us back. There's also a light showing dumbbells, a flower, and a gaming console with hands all around reaching out. When we look at this, the distortion happens, and we are sent back to the beginning. Jimmy has to physically walk backwards to progress through. He's teleported to another part of the ship that drops down through a tunnel filled with poly posters. The next part is a vent surrounded by dozens of axes. Jimmy climbs through and sees another one of Daisuke's flowers. We drop down again to find Swansea tied to a chair with a gun on the floor. We point it at him and shoot him, which teleports Jimmy to the graveyard. As we enter, it starts a minigame where Swansea is chasing us with the axe trying to kill us. We have to shoot him enough times to win. There's a memorial for Daisuke in the middle, and we can hear a baby crying in the background. Once we shoot him enough, it cuts to a different scene where Swansea is sitting back in the chair again, not tied up, with Jimmy standing in front of him holding the gun. In the background, the film starts playing, showing Swansea's life. He starts monologuing about the ups and downs in his life, such as being an alcoholic and almost dying before rehabilitating himself. At the end of his monologue, Swansea calls out Jimmy, who can only reply that he's going to fix everything. He then raises the gun and shoots Swansea in the head. The first part of the sequence, where we see Daisuke walking away, represents what Jimmy did to him in his final moments. He pushed him to go into the vent, despite him showing reluctance, and when the light turns from white to red, it symbolises how Daisuke's fate is locked in, and there's no going back. When Jimmy is unable to turn around in the next sequence, having to physically walk backwards shows how he would do anything to avoid responsibility. I think that Swansea could have been chasing Jimmy at this point, as if Jimmy tries to turn around, we see a distorted face that looks like Swansea's, as if Jimmy knows that Swansea is on his back. Another clue that Jimmy is being chased is that in the next scene, Jimmy is surrounded by axes, and when traversing through the imaginary vent, an axe strikes the outside. When it goes to Swansea's monologue, after everything Swansea said, even after calling him out for being a selfish coward that manipulated a young man to his death, all that Jimmy can say is that he's going to fix everything. No wonder Swansea's last words were "fuck you." Take Responsibility Part 3. Even if Curly isn't there, Jimmy always feels his eyes on him, symbolised by the increasing number of eyeballs as Jimmy physically is running around in circles. He ends up finding Curly sitting in a chair with valves attached to him. Jimmy has to realign his organs and feed Curly his own leg, which shows how Jimmy would do anything to keep Curly alive, only at the extent of everyone else's pain. Once we succeed, we go into third person as Jimmy is walking in the TV in some sort of out-of-body experience. He walks towards Curly sitting in a chair on fire. Curly wants to go home. Jimmy says they are home. Curly wonders why Jimmy hasn't finished what he started by making Curly into the villain. Jimmy says they can both be heroes and falls to his knees crying. He proclaims everything was an accident and that he made a mistake. He apologises to Curly. Jimmy claiming that they are home shows that he knows that this is the end for them, or that home is just a place that they stay in between shifts until they have to spend another year shipping another pointless product. Curly is the only one who takes a small bit of responsibility, even if technically it's too late. He admits that he could have stopped Jimmy, whereas Jimmy can only say that his mistake caused this quote-unquote accident to happen, and then apologises to Curly. But it's not a true apology. He's not apologising for assaulting a crew member and crashing the ship when he couldn't admit what he did, dooming the crew because of his selfish action. He's apologising as if he did something small that caused this disaster to unfold. If you remove Jimmy from the crew before the events of the game took place, none of this would have happened and everyone would still be alive. Take Responsibility Part 4. Jimmy comes across a giant red flesh. He uses an ultrasound scanner and discovers a pony kicking its legs and potentially crying. As we keep looking, we eventually see a baby. The screen goes static as the red flesh starts to react as a dozen fused polydolls comes out and tries to chase Jimmy. In order to pass this section, you have to look away from the polydoll to succeed. As you probably guessed, this giant ball of red flesh is Anya's cervix, and the pony kicking around represents hers and Jimmy's baby. Jimmy had to look away to succeed, which shows how he took no responsibility for his assault on Anya and the problems she had to deal with after the crash. It's also one thing to note that through every out of reality sequence Jimmy goes through, he sees Daisuke, he talks to Swansea and Curly, but he doesn't even think of Anya whatsoever. The most he can think of related to her is the baby, showing how he never truly saw her as a person. At the end of the sequence, we see a wall of crew ID cards, and it's noted that Anya's and Curly's are always obstructed. We go up the staircase where empty bottles of mouthwash fall down the stairs. At the top of the huge pile, we see Polly at the top. He calls Jimmy boss, but then asks if he should refer to him as old man. He says Jimmy sees himself as caged and misunderstood. Jimmy says he's going to take responsibility and save him and Curly. He says he fucked up and he will make this right, and that our worst moments don't make us monsters. Polly cuts him off and asks him, if that's true, then why is Jimmy so concerned with him? The ID sequence shows again that he never saw Anya as a whole person. I'd imagine that the reason Curly's ID is obscured is that Jimmy's decline in mental state, he may have forgotten what Curly originally looked like, especially as his ID got burnt up in the crash. Although this is so we don't see Curly's face before a certain point. When Jimmy talks to Polly, he's talking to his child, referring to the old man comment, and nobody really understands who Jimmy is and what he's been through. And to be fair, we don't know anything about Jimmy outside of this story. We only get clues like how he struggled, but we don't get the reasons why. But even so, no matter what happened to him back home, it's no excuse for everything he done during the events of the game. It's rare these days for people not to have trauma from something in their past, but most people don't use that as an excuse to treat people badly. He thinks he can redeem himself because he knows he fucked up and is going to try and fix everything. Having the audacity to reference Anya's quote that our worst moments don't make us monsters. She used it to refer to Curly when she thought he crashed the ship, but Jimmy uses it thinking it can redeem himself and minimize his actions. Polly mentions that even after all this, he's still concerned with what Curly thinks of him. He's not saving Curly as an apology for everything he's done. He's doing it to make himself seem better in the eyes of Curly. 1 hour until judgment. Jimmy carries Curly to the main room where he's positioned the dead bodies of the crewmates, recreating Curly's birthday party, but with Curly as the cake. When Jimmy lays him down, the dead crewmates come to life and start clapping and cheering for Captain Jimmy. Jimmy grabs the knife and starts cutting into Curly's leg, placing a piece on each person's plate. He starts talking about how most people struggle to put food on the table, and how the rest of the crew would never be able to achieve the same status as him. But now, everything he had worked towards had been swept away from him. Jimmy says he forgives him and won't give up on him. He brings up that sometimes they have good days and sometimes they have to accept the bad days, referring to Curly's cake speech earlier. Jimmy is at his most insane and delusional. He imagines the crewmates that he killed, clapping and cheering for his non-existent effort as their captain. He's imagining what Curly had at the beginning of the game that shows his jealousy towards how others view Curly versus him. He's physically and mentally recreating the party, having Curly as the cake to make him look inferior to him, and to quote, cut the cake in order to impose pain towards him. He still tells him that he forgives him, as if it was Curly's fault that other people struggled to take care of themselves. This is despite Curly getting him a job with Pony Express to get him back on his feet, bringing up that some people have good days and bad days, again, taking what someone else says and making it his own, even though in context of the game, he's the only one that causes bad days for other characters. 0 hours until judgment. The crewmates are back to being slumped in their chairs. Jimmy picks up Curly again and carries him towards utility. He places him in the one functioning cryopod, and our perspective shifts to Curly. Jimmy talks about how grateful he was to have Curly as a friend, and how he always had his back. He proclaims that they fixed it, then that he fixed it. He turns on the cryopod and walks out of sight. As Curly slowly freezes, we can see and hear a gunshot as Jimmy takes his own life. Even though Jimmy dies at the end, this isn't a happy ending where the heroes win and the villain is defeated. Jimmy dies truly thinking that he's fixed everything and that he's been redeemed. He dies on his own terms and happy with the last thing he did. Whereas in reality, Anya took her own life because Jimmy got her pregnant. Daisuke had to be killed by Swansea, and Swansea was killed by Jimmy. Curly was unable to do anything to save them and had to watch and suffer as his friend plays captain and destroys the crew. He thinks that putting Curly in the cryopod was his redemption, but in reality, he likely put Curly through 20 more years of hell. It's likely it would have been better if he killed Curly and gotten himself into that pod and made up a story to make him into the hero if he actually got saved. However, in his last few moments, he knew that doing that would make him feel like the bad guy as he's lying about what really happened. But with the original ending, he thinks he's redeemed himself and dies believing he's the hero. Jimmy is the dead pixel and the 1% of germs left from the mouthwash. People like Curly may think that the trouble they cause is minor or almost insignificant, but if you don't keep track of them, it can corrupt your entire system. If he had fixed the problem by prioritizing the right people, then the event wouldn't have taken place. The basis of the story revolves around one person causing all the problems. Taking them out would mean none of this would have ever happened. To give Jimmy benefit of the doubt, he is an awful person, evidently, but it does make you wonder how he ended up being so mentally disturbed in the first place. I do have two theories that are very opposing, but I feel like both could apply. My first one is the one that most people would think of, that Jimmy came from a rough home with a terrible upbringing, like similar to BoJack Horseman, and that turned him into a monster. Funnily enough, those two characters are very similar, but BoJack kind of has redeeming qualities, whereas Jimmy has virtually none. And my second theory, which people will probably disagree with, is that like Jimmy like came from maybe like a wealthy family and he grew up entitled, which explained why he thinks he deserves what he has. And maybe like he did so many terrible things because of his entitlement that his family maybe cut him off. So he basically had to deal with on his own, which is how he struggled. And obviously, it's less likely, definitely, but it does explain his delusions of grandeur as well. And it also makes him like more hateable, like kind of an entitled rich boy who thought he'd have an easy, successful life, but didn't in the end. Like, I haven't seen 13 Reasons Why, and I never will, but like, kind of like Bryce Walker with all the crimes that he committed, how he basically got away with it, as far as I'm aware. Thank you all so much for watching my fifth and final video on the characters of Mouthwashing. I have really enjoyed this series and I enjoyed the game, obviously, and the disturbing story behind it that absolutely made me feel lots of emotions. And I'm really happy with the reception I've got from all you guys. Like, you guys are really cool and really supportive, and I really appreciate you just watching and liking my stuff and commenting, of course. It's been really nice to get that feedback. Now, little spoilers ahead. So now mouthwashing is officially finished. By the way, I should mention, which I didn't even realize, it's past its date, but we're basically around the 1 year anniversary of it. So of course, the one per video I would do is of the best character in the game, of course, good old Jim Bob, which we love him, don't we, as a fandom. Spoilers for my next video is likely going to be about this recent viral movie that myself and the rest of the world have become obsessed with. I just have so much to say about it. It's just really just a fun time. I really do enjoy it. Anyway, please like, subscribe, share your thoughts down below, and I've got a whole bunch of ideas of videos I want to do, and I'm very excited. And you guys are amazing, but one favor I could ask is if you could check out my Anu video, because basically I re-uploaded it, so I think YouTube thought that I was probably copying someone else's content or something, so they didn't promote it as much. Probably also because it was the first video I ever did. and I would love it if she didn't get less attention than Jimmy because she deserves it and he doesn't. But it's up to you, of course. You do whatever you want, and I appreciate you all for what you already do. But anyway, that is it, and I will see you in the near but probably far future. Bye.